Los Santos was cooking. It wasn't just hot. It was personal. The sun hung in the sky like a giant angry eye, staring down at the sprawling city without blinking. The air was thick and heavy, like a wet blanket you couldn't throw off. Every breath felt like you were inhaling steam. The palm trees drooped their leaves. The famous Vinewood sign shimmered and distorted in the heat. The city felt trapped under a magnifying glass. The heat kept getting more intense by the hour. The heat wave had a name. On TV they called it a heat dome. On the street it felt like a prison sentence. Asphalt softened, sticky underfoot. Heat rose from the pavement in wavy lines. Cars became ovens on wheels, too hot to touch. Distant sirens, chatter of pedestrians, hum of traffic, all muffled by the oppressive heat. It was a silent, invisible enemy winning slowly. The sky was a strange, pale, washed-out color, hazy with smog and trapped humidity. Looking up felt like peering through a dusty window. The ocean offered little relief. Beaches were empty, water too warm, sand scorching. Waves lapped lazily, tired. Smog clung to downtown skyscrapers like a greasy film. This heat was different. It had been building for days. At first it was a novelty. "Sure is hot today," people would say. Now novelty had worn off. Dread set in. Heat seeped through cracks and under doors. It radiated from concrete and brick long after sunset. The city was in a slow roasting oven. Everyone could feel the temperature rising with no end in sight. The tension was as thick as the air itself. Inside a city bus crawling through the congested streets of Strawberry, the afternoon was a pressure cooker. The sun beat down with a relentless, punishing force, turning metal and asphalt into a city-wide griddle. A man named Marcus wiped sweat from his brow for the 10th time in as many minutes. He was the captain of this ship, a city bus driver navigating a sea of shimmering heat. His uniform, usually a crisp symbol of his daily duty, was now just a damp cloth clinging to his skin. He'd been driving this same route for 12 years, but he'd never felt a day like this one. His bus was a rolling greenhouse, the air conditioning sputtering out cool air that barely made a difference. It was a tired, mechanical sigh against an oppressive wall of humidity. The windows were fogged not from cold, but from the collective breath and sweat of 50 souls packed inside, each one sharing in the silent, simmering misery. Marcus gripped the huge steering wheel, his knuckles white. It wasn't from anger, but from a deep, weary tension. Every red light felt like an eternity, every inch of traffic a personal defeat. He saw the city through a giant pane of glass, watching its people suffer. The usual frantic energy of the streets had been replaced by a slow, lethargic crawl. Everyone was searching for an escape, a sliver of shade, a moment of relief that never seemed to come. He saw old ladies fanning themselves with newspapers, their movements slow and tired. He saw kids, usually bursting with energy, looking lethargic, their games forgotten. Every stop brought a new wave of hot air and more tired, irritable faces, each one a mirror of the city's exhaustion. His job was to keep moving, but the city and the heat were making it almost impossible. Meanwhile, in a busy hospital in Davis, a nurse named Sophia was in constant motion. Here, the heat wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a predator, and the emergency room was its hunting ground. The air was thick with the smell of antiseptic and the low hum of overworked machinery, a sound that did little to mask the quiet desperation. The emergency room was overflowing. Gurneys lined the hallways, a grim parade of the heat's casualties. The triage board was a sea of red alerts. There were elderly patients with heat stroke, their bodies unable to regulate the temperature. Construction workers with severe dehydration, their strong frames withered by the sun. And children with asthma, struggling to draw a clean breath in the thick, polluted air. Sophia moved from one bed to another, her light blue scrubs already damp with sweat. The mask she wore felt suffocating, sticking to her face with every breath. She was a blur of efficiency and empathy, offering a calm word here, adjusting an IV drip there. The hospital's air conditioning was humming loudly, strained to its absolute limit, a constant reminder of the building's own fragility. She could feel the fatigue in her bones, a weariness that matched the mood of her patients. She worried about the most vulnerable, knowing the hospital was their last hope for relief, a fragile sanctuary against the furnace outside. In a small corner store in Vespucci Beach, a shop owner named Jin stood behind his counter, a sentinel guarding an oasis of cold. Outside, the boardwalk was strangely quiet, the usual crowds driven away by the scorching sand and blistering sun. He watched the coolers work overtime, the hum of their motors the soundtrack of his anxiety. These were old machines, loyal servants that had been with him since he bought the store. Now, they groaned under the strain, their metal bodies hot to the touch. Every time a customer opened a door, a cloud of precious cold air would escape, and the motors would groan louder, a painful protest. His electricity bill was going to be astronomical, a figure he tried not to think about. Right now, he was focused on keeping the drinks cold. Cold water was like gold right now. He saw the desperation in people's eyes as they came in, their faces flushed, their clothes damp. They didn't browse. They headed straight for the refrigerators. He was providing a small oasis, a brief respite. But he wondered how long his old equipment and his bank account could handle the strain. And then there was Leo, a young gamer who lived in a small apartment in Chamberlain Hills. For him, the world outside didn't exist much. His reality was inside his computer, a digital landscape of quests and battles. It was his kingdom, a place he could control. But the heat was an intruder that couldn't be ignored. It seeped through the thin walls and single-pane window, a physical force that his digital world was powerless against. The air in his room was stagnant and heavy. His powerful gaming PC, his portal to other worlds, was now his enemy, generating its own inferno. The fans whirred at maximum speed, a frantic, useless effort. The small fan in his window was just pushing hot air around, a sad parody of a cool breeze. The back of his neck was slick with sweat, and his fingers kept slipping on the keyboard, costing him a crucial move in his game. He was starting to feel trapped, not by the game's dungeon, but by the four walls of his sweltering room. He ripped off his headset, the faux leather damp and sticky against his ears. The silence that followed was filled only by the drone of the fans. The digital escape was becoming less and less effective as the physical reality of the heat became unbearable. For the first time in a long time, Leo wanted out, but there was nowhere to go. The real problem wasn't just the sun, not the shimmering waves of heat rising from the asphalt. That was just the symptom. The disease was something else entirely. It was invisible, hidden away in a complex, sprawling web of wires and transformers that crisscrossed the city like a vast, metallic nervous system. The Los Santos power grid was old, dangerously old. It was a patchwork system, a Frankenstein's monster of engineering, with some parts dating back decades, bolted onto newer, but still inadequate, additions. It was designed for a different time, a smaller city, and most importantly, a different climate. A climate that no longer existed. Now, under the relentless assault of the heat dome, it was being pushed far beyond its breaking point. In the hushed, chilled control rooms across the city, the people who babysat the grid watched their monitors with a growing, sickening sense of alarm. They were the first line of defense, the keepers of the city's lifeblood, and they were losing. The lines on the graphs that measured energy consumption weren't just climbing, they were soaring. A sheer vertical ascent into uncharted territory, reaching levels they had never seen before, not even in their worst-case simulations. Every air conditioner, every fan, every refrigerator, every server farm, every office tower was drawing power, putting an immense, crushing strain on the aging infrastructure. The system was groaning under the weight of a million small, desperate demands for relief. A million fingers turning a dial, pushing a button, seeking a small pocket of cool. The city was overloading itself, one household at a time. In every home, every office, every shop, the battle against the heat was being fought with electricity. It was the only weapon they had. Fans that had been stored in closets for years were now dusted off and spinning at full blast, rattling on windowsills and nightstands. Air conditioning units, many of which were old and horribly inefficient, were running non-stop. their compressors humming a constant, desperate tune that became the city's unofficial anthem. People were plugging in extra fans, buying the last portable cooling units from barren store shelves, keeping their refrigerators working harder to keep food from spoiling. Each individual act of seeking comfort was adding another drop of pressure to a system that was already full to bursting. A single drop is nothing. A million drops can break a dam. The collective desire for coolness, a basic human need, was becoming a threat in itself. Out in the field, the first soldiers fell. Utility crews were dispatched to transformers that were literally melting down, their internal components failing under the thermal stress. But for every fire they put out, 2 more would ignite somewhere else. It was a losing battle. Then, the warning signs began to appear. Small flickers in the system that hinted at the larger, catastrophic problem brewing beneath the surface. In some neighborhoods, the lights would dim for a moment before returning to full brightness. A brownout. A voltage drop. The grid taking a deep, shuddering breath. Traffic lights at busy intersections would suddenly go dark for a few seconds, causing drivers to slam on their brakes in confusion, turning order into a brief, heart-stopping moment of chaos. These were the first spasms of a system in distress, the tremors before the earthquake. It was like a body starting to tremble before a seizure. Most people didn't think much of it. A flicker of the lights, a rebooting computer. Annoyances, nothing more. They blamed it on a temporary glitch, a surge, not realizing they were witnessing the early, frantic stages of a citywide failure. The grid was screaming for help, sending out mayday signals in a language of flickers and surges, but nobody was listening. The stakes were incredibly, terrifyingly high. A prolonged power outage in this heat wouldn't just be an inconvenience, it would be a catastrophe, a public health disaster on an unprecedented scale. For hospitals like the one where Sophia worked, where life and death were measured in beeps and breaths, it would mean relying on backup generators that might not last, that were never designed for a siege of this length. For people stuck in the glass and steel towers of the city, the elderly and the infirm trapped in high-rise apartments, it would mean no elevators and, because the pumps would fail, no running water. Vertical tombs in the sky. For Marcus, trying to keep the city's arteries flowing, it would mean absolute chaos on the streets, a city paralyzed by its own dead technology. For Jin, and thousands of small business owners like him, it would mean watching his entire livelihood, everything he'd worked for, literally melt and spoil in the heat. And for everyone, rich and poor, young and old, it would mean losing their primary, and for many, their only defense against a heat wave that was already proving to be lethally dangerous. The city was balanced on a knife's edge, a metropolis of millions held hostage by copper and steel, and the wires that held it all together were humming with a dangerous electric tension, singing a song that promised darkness. The failure began not with a bang, but with a citywide sigh. At 2:14 p.m., the delicate balance of supply and demand, a tightrope the city walked every sweltering afternoon, finally shattered. It was a collective exhalation, a sudden, shared cessation of energy that rippled through every wire, every circuit, every life. It started deep within the grid, a single, anonymous transformer at a substation in La Puerta. For weeks it had been groaning under an impossible strain, a silent soldier battling the relentless thermal assault. Millions of air conditioners, all demanding relief from the oppressive heat, were drawing more power than the system was ever designed to handle. The transformer, its oil boiling, its metal components warping under the thermal stress, finally surrendered to the immense load. This one failure created a catastrophic imbalance. The grid's automated systems, designed for minor faults, tried to compensate, rerouting an impossible surge of electricity to neighboring circuits. It was like trying to divert a tidal wave into a garden hose. Like a line of dominoes, they too failed, one after another, in a chain reaction that raced across the city in milliseconds. A wave of darkness, moving at nearly the speed of light. The complex web of power that held Los Santos together, the city's invisible nervous system, simply unraveled. For the engineers in the city's nerve center, staring at their now useless monitors, it was a moment of profound, sickening defeat. They had war-gamed this scenario, run countless simulations, but the speed and totality of the collapse was beyond their worst projections. Alarms blared for a few seconds on battery backup, then fell silent. The data was gone. The controls were gone. The city was on its own. For the millions of people across Los Santos, the moment was defined by a sudden, collective stop. It was 1,000 different moments of interruption, all happening at once. In offices, the ceaseless hum of computers, the rhythmic clatter of keyboards, the whir of printers. It all ceased, replaced by an unnerving silence and the sudden alien darkness of emergency lighting. The background noise of modern work had vanished. In homes, televisions went black mid-sentence, cutting off commentators and characters alike. Refrigerators stopped their low, comforting humming. The life-saving whir of air conditioners, the one thing holding the blistering heat at bay, died with a final, sighing rotation of the fan blades. The city, a machine of constant noise and motion, was abruptly unplugged. The transition was so swift, so total, that for a long moment, the only sound was the fading electronic echo of a world that had just been running. It was a ghost sound, a memory of energy. Then a new sound began to build. A wave of confused murmurs, of questions called from balconies, of car horns starting to blare in powerless intersections, spreading from street to street. The initial reaction was not panic, but a deep, profound disbelief. The mind struggled to process the sudden absence of a fundamental reality. People stared at their lifeless devices, a reflexive, almost pathetic dance of denial. They tapped at dead keyboards, flicked light switches that did nothing, and held phones to the sky, searching for a signal that had vanished along with the power that sustained its towers. There was a collective, citywide instinct to check if the problem was local. A blown fuse, a tripped breaker. People moved to their windows, their balconies, their front doors, searching for clues in the world outside. They saw their neighbors doing the exact same thing, their faces framed in the windows of silent, dark buildings across the street. This shared act of looking out, of seeking confirmation from a stranger's bewildered face, was the first moment of a new, unsettling community. A silent, citywide conversation of shrugged shoulders and outstretched palms. The realization dawned slowly, then all at once. This wasn't just a blown fuse or a neighborhood issue. This was everything, everywhere. The entire city, from the gleaming towers of downtown to the sprawling suburbs of Vinewood Hills, had gone dark under the white-hot afternoon sun. And then, the immediate consequence made itself felt: the return of the heat. Without air conditioning, the cool, conditioned air that had been artificially maintained in every home, office, and store began to dissipate almost instantly. The thermal equilibrium was broken. The oppressive, suffocating heat of the outside world, an enemy held at bay by a constant supply of power, started to seep in through windows and under doors. It was an invasion. It reclaimed the spaces it had been banished from, turning every room into a potential oven. The sanctuary was gone. People could feel the temperature in their offices and homes beginning to climb, minute by minute. The brief moment of confusion was quickly being replaced by a more primal and urgent concern. For some, it was discomfort. For the elderly, the infirm, and the very young, it was a threat. The heat was no longer just outside. It was coming in, and there was no switch to flip, no button to press to make it stop. The great unplugging had left the city utterly, terrifyingly defenseless. As the first 30 minutes passed, a new reality began to settle over Los Santos. The sun, though still powerful, was beginning its slow descent towards the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows across the paralyzed city. The initial shock was giving way to a grim acceptance. This was not a momentary flicker. This was real. The city was now a patchwork of distinct and separate experiences, defined by location, resources, and luck. In the dense neighborhoods of South Los Santos, people spilled out of their sweltering apartments onto the streets, seeking any breath of air and sharing scraps of information. The streets became impromptu community centers, filled with a nervous, vibrant energy. In the sprawling suburbs, the scene was quieter, but no less tense. Families gathered on their front lawns. The loud roar of a newly started generator, a sound that drew both envy and resentment from neighbors. People were taking stock of their supplies. Bottled water, canned food, batteries, and a quiet, anxious calculus of survival was beginning in households across the city. Traffic remained at a standstill on major arteries and freeways, a vast parking lot of useless metal. The port was silent, the giant cranes standing like motionless skeletons against the darkening sky. The entire economic and logistical heartbeat of the metropolis had stopped. As the sun touched the horizon, the true scale of the blackout became visible. The coming night would not bring the familiar, comforting glow of millions of electric lights. It would bring a deep, profound darkness, a darkness the city had not experienced in generations. The heat would linger long after the sun was gone, trapped by the concrete and asphalt. The 30-minute mark was not an end, but the beginning of a much longer and more challenging ordeal. The city was in shadow, both literally and figuratively, facing a night that promised to test the limits of its resilience, its compassion, and its will to endure.